Hey, welcome back to the X podcast. Sitting here with fire, wind, and the spirit that leads us.
Woo!
And Zach.
My shirt.
That's very anticlimactic after Fire, Wind, and Spirit.
Well, you don't love the nicknames.
Yeah, it just depends on which one. But generally, I don't.
What's been your favorite so far?
There's been a cavalcade of ones I've forgotten.
Wow.
So.
Whoa.
Nice
All
word.
right, how about Cavalcade Chad?
Cavalcade.
Cavalcade Chad. There
Or
we
Cavalcade Calvin.
If you haven't picked up on what he does, he just picks a word and then alliterates it
Yes.
with a random name. The first one that comes to his mind.
Don't give it away.
That's a secret.
That's a secret. All right. What have you been thinking about?
What have I been thinking
Yes.
about?
What have you been thinking about?
That's a loaded question. What have I been thinking about? I've been thinking about a lot of things.
Yeah.
One
What's
is
the
taxes.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that? Is that connected to anything?
No.
No projects?
Well, it is connected to something because
Do we want to talk about
April
it?
15th
There's
is
a lot-
coming up in like just a few days after this may come out.
It's very true.
And so one is business related taxes.
Okay.
And something for the church that we're exploring. And so
You're also working on a project. Do we want to tease this out yet?
nah.
Okay. Nah. Don't want to talk about it.
We will next month, I think.
No
Okay.
projects.
What projects are you working on?
Nothing.
Nothing.
He's super dad.
I'm super dead right
That's
now.
his project right now.
Super dad. Okay. Well, we're in the middle. Very specific thing we thought would be an interesting topic to dive into today because we were in the middle of a series on Sunday that I don't know what you were expecting the response to be, but it's called Beyond Religion. I know we've been excited about it. I know this kind of topic for a series is, I feel like, right up the alley for our church.
Mhm.
We're not a very churchy church. We're not a very religious church. But we know that people come from all kinds of different backgrounds. It's just so it's been interesting to see the response as you've teased out, and Pastor Jesse's done a message. And I think I told you, anytime I hear a talk or see a message or there's a book talking about like religion or religious spirit or religious mindset, my first thought is, it's going to be really challenging. And I think it has been challenging for people. But I think I was telling you is just so many stories have come out that I've been surprised that it seems like it's been even more healing for our church than it has been challenging. There's been so many people because my mind, I'm like, I guess I always think, I'm like, well, people that are here, like they get it.
Yeah.
Like they see people with tattoos leading. They see people with jeans talking. They know we're not a churchy church, but it is easy to forget there's people still unpacking
Oh, yeah.
wounds from yesterday, still unpacking. We're all, I feel like, till the day we die, going to unpack certain religious mindsets we may not even realize we have.
Yeah.
So it's been a very fascinating series. I think been really powerful. A lot of great conversations come out of it, but we got an email in that you sent to us that had, I thought, some really interesting points to jump off from. And do we want to give shout out name?
Sure.
Feel good about that?
Sure.
They don't say.
Would you
So
give
we
first
can't.
name?
Okay. All right. We'll just say Jackie.
Yeah.
Jackie. And this is what she said. She had a lot of really, really kind things to say about the service Sunday, the message, and then she went straight into a question. She said, I have a question for you this time. I so love the thought of thinking about what would love do. You introduced WWLD.
Yeah.
Not what would Jesus do. You said that's a bad question to ask, but you said we should ask what would love do.
I did not say that.
I'm just kidding. But
We just need an updated version. That's all.
yeah. Updated version. You try to nuance it. Okay. I wish we would all think that way, and I remember things and remember that way, and treat each other with constant love. But it's hard. Let's face it. There is true evil in this world. That is where my question lies. How do we combat evil? It's so hard to remember what love would do in the face of all evil in the world. And then she adds, I'm a sentimental and sensitive person, and I have love for all, but I also am a realistic type A personality and would fight fearlessly for my loved ones. And then I love this. She goes, I'm a 5th degree black belt after all. Haha. And then she just kind of ends it. It's hard to balance the two, love and evil. How do you manage the two? I know God allows evil in the world for certain things to happen that we don't know the reasons why, and just have to trust. I believe everything happens for a reason. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing I would just say is thank you for the kind words. I think we appreciate that. So thank you for the positive and the nice words that she said. So Jackie, thank you for that. I think she even, how did she said? She said, I just love this church. One of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably meaning like she loves I think what she loves, probably connecting that to the series, is loves the spirit of our church and the emphasis that we place on relationship over religion, and to not just make church a place full of rituals that kind of feel devoid of meaning, but actually a place where you come and you are encouraged and you find hope and you feel, nearer to God when you leave, and all those kind of things that we hope for. So number one, I think it's really kind of her to say those words. I love that she finds that. Let me just say this. I've had a lot of feedback as well, just personally from people, and some of them in tears, because I could tell, like kind of you said, the impact of being in hyper-religious environments has kind of, I asked some of them, I was like, they not only left the church, but they left God. For some of them, not just like we had a first-time guest this past weekend who told me that in tears. And you could tell there was like this sense of like feeling like this is a place where I can be safe and I can actually come in a journey to find God. I had another young-ish guy come up to me, and he had some young kids, and he was just thanking me for the series, and he was a PK, and just through his experience, a lot of what he had just pushed him away from God. And I could even tell he's still processing. I said, are you in a process of kind of, shall I say, deconstructing? He was like, yes, I have been, like, deconstructing. I said, well, I'm glad you're here. I think it's best to do that in community. And so seeing the impact of religion and when I say religion, but if you missed this series, it's hard to maybe understand, but the hyper-religious, legalistic environments have done is so damaging. And so I guess I just want to say, like, it's really powerful to hear. And I think that's the unexpected thing. I wasn't expecting that. I just thought, it's going to give people something to kind of frame or think, but just the amount of people that I had people came up to me who literally in their like mid-late 30s, one woman bought her first pair of jeans 6 months ago. And she's just like, she feels liberated and, in so many ways, and feels actually closer to God than she ever has in her life from growing up in a hyper-religious environment. So that has kind of like been a really beautiful thing to see in our community. Specifically about her question, I think I just want to recognize, and we could talk about it, that is a very interesting tension that she talks about. And Jesus, I think, if anybody knew or was on the bad end of experiencing the evil in this world and only giving love in response, it was Jesus. So, right. I mean, I think if anybody, we think about, as this comes out and we're approaching Holy Week, and you think about what he went through. That's right. I mean, that is the evidence of evil. That's right. What did Jesus ever do other than heal people and love the people that everyone else dismissed and all of that? And yet they still brutally beat him and killed him. Yeah. And so there's a tension that we have to live in. And it's an interesting conversation to think about those two, because I gave the idea of, if love is the primary guardrail, we don't need to have, all of these legalistic rules of what you can and can't do. What we need to do is ask that question, what would love do in this situation? And let that be our guide. And so that, just to give a little bit of context, that's kind of where this question comes from. So if anybody's listening to this and you missed it, that was kind of the emphasis of what I said. But I don't know. I think we could talk about the whole idea of evil and our response to evil.
Well, it's interesting, because the first thing I thought about, it's interesting you brought up Jesus, and even specifically how he moves through Holy Week. I know that we're kind of at the beginning or anticipating that even soon within our own calendar now. The first person I thought about was Peter. It's funny because I think Peter really represents, I think, what a lot of, let's just say Western, maybe American people in our own culture feel today as our response to evil. So y'all remember the famous scene in the garden where evil's coming to arrest Jesus, and what's his response?
lops the ear off of Malchus. And one of the books actually gives his name.
Gives his name.
Malchus or something is a servant of the high priest.
Yeah. So I just want to recognize, and first of all, let me just say this: I'm not anti-Peter, or I see myself in Peter a lot. I think a lot of us can resonate with Peter's response, and I think it's interesting, even as we start this conversation around the question, that let's just acknowledge that the first human reaction to evil, whenever we see it, is to fight back. Like that is our first, just almost binary reaction. And we can talk about fight or flight, because I do think flight is also a primary reaction. But I think that within the context of kind of what you're asking, Jackie, hey, when is it appropriate to fight back? Like, should we fight back? And I think it's interesting, in just starting off the conversation there, you see the response of Jesus in that moment. Jesus responds by telling Peter to put away his sword. And then he picks up the man's ear and he heals it. And then away we go in the rest of the story. Well, there's a lot of implication there. And we're not...
Okay, so here's the other thing. Let me add one. So let's get into the whole narrative, right? Yes. And see how, this is what I'm saying, how, not I want to say confusing, but how difficult it is to navigate this tension. Let me give you a little bit more context, right? So what happens within that same time period of that week, right? Couple things. One, Jesus reacts to the evil in the temple.
He does.
And literally makes a whip.
He does.
And I don't know if he used that specifically on people or to make some noise, and flips over tables, which you got to go see part 2 of The Chosen, and you said that scene was intense.
Yeah.
Really intense, right? So you have that. The same time, in that week, he has a conversation with his disciples about what's going to happen. And he even warns them and says, so, like, you might want a sword or two. And so they look around. And what's funny, a lot of people don't get this, right? I don't know if it was Peter that responds or who does. I don't remember what the text tells us. But their response when Jesus says, hey, I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring division and da-da-da. In other words, the truth of who he is was going to actually separate and cause families to divide. And he says... And he says, you're going to need some swords. And immediately the response is, well, we got 2 of them. It doesn't even show like, well, we better go get some. It was like, will these work? So it almost gives a picture that they're carrying.
They're ready
You know
to
what
go.
I mean?
Yes.
And then you juxtaposition that with them as they come to arrest Jesus.
Yes.
And Peter getting out the sword and lopping off the guy's ear. And again, why is that? Because Peter was trying to... The same thing he said before, which I want to go back to what Jackie said, because this is where, when Jesus first told the disciples what was going to happen to him, the first time he did that, Matthew 16, what was Peter's response?
Didn't he say that I would follow you and I would...
No, he basically told him, not over my dead body. He was like, says, I'm never...
You're
Satan.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So what I would say is, like, Jackie's response in this, she was like, I will fight for my loved ones.
Yes.
That's what Peter was saying.
Yes.
I love you too much. There's no way I'm going to let you go to Jerusalem and do that.
Yes.
And then, that's why I'm saying this whole thing is a little bit complicated.
It is.
And then you get to the moment that Jesus was actually telling him that I'm here for.
Yes.
And the moment Peter tries to step in, he's like, put it away.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be careful a little bit with this, that we don't pick and choose one. Like, I've seen this before. I've seen those who pick and choose the one statement where Jesus says, I came for, well, the one where he said, I came for this, and so it's going to be really bad. You're going to need some swords. We got 2. Jesus like, that's enough, right? You got 2. I've seen some people just latch on to one verse and use that to kind of justify an entire philosophy and position about how to address bad guys and guns and evil. That whole moment, right? And the same time, you could use other moments to kind of go, Jesus is a complete pacifist and would never confront evil. And then you get him in the temple flipping over that.
No, he's very confrontational.
My point is, there's a lot of that could be confusing about this. And I think we have to be careful for one perspective or another, that we don't just cherry pick a verse and then we create an entire position and philosophy that really what we're doing, and this is the danger, is we're actually just getting the Bible to support what we really want to believe and
That's right.
do.
No, it's good. When you talk about the tension of this, of love and evil, I'm, for whatever reason, my mind works a different way when I read her question. There is a tension for sure when it comes down to fleshing it out, like the scenarios y'all presented. It's not always cut and paste.
Yeah.
For me, it helps to start maybe at a more ideological level, like when she's talking about love and evil. Because in my mind, I don't see a tension. I actually think love produces hate, which may sound weird, but love for people produces hatred for anything that hurts people. So I love humanity, therefore I hate poverty. I love women and children, therefore I hate human trafficking. So I say that because I think sometimes we create a tension ideologically where there doesn't need to be. And so we feel bad if we hate something or we're angered by something. And I would actually say, just like with the example in the temple, the reason is funny. I don't know why I'm thinking about this randomly, but over Christmas, I saw a guy post that he was never going back to church at all because he went, and it wasn't our church, went to a local church. I don't even know how I'm Facebook friends with this guy. But said, I'm never going back to a church because they were selling stuff. It was like their version of a shop. And I don't know why, because I never did this, but I almost comment. I'm not going to comment, but I sent him a message. I said, hey, just this helps at all. A little bit of context. Jesus wasn't mad about merch. Jesus was mad because people were risking their lives traveling from all over the world to worship God, and they couldn't bring their sacrifices with them because roads were dangerous and had robbers and all kind of things and elements of. And so they literally, it was okay. It was expected and normative to have a place in the temple where people could go in and purchase their things for sacrifice. Problem is they were hiking up prices and exploiting the poor to where people were literally being robbed and or couldn't even worship God. That's why Jesus was angry, because he loves people and he loves when people get to encounter him and experience him and worship. And so I just say that because I think sometimes we pit one against the other. And I would just say, if you have a child, you have a daughter, the fact that you love your daughter means you hate kidnapping. The rubber meets the road when it comes to how do you address it. And that's where I think it can be tricky. And I think that's where you have to say, but I think the other ideological thing that helps me is to realize even when you address evil, you're not just doing it for the love of the people that are victims. You're also doing it out of the love for the people who are the perpetrators, which I know is odd to say.
Hold on. Let me just to that point.
Yeah,
I think because the healthiest response, or the holiest, for lack of a better term, spiritual term, but response to evil is, even if you have to stop somebody where you're doing it, but you are trying to do it in a there's a loving thing for them.
Yeah.
Not a lot of. I don't think that's how a lot of people feel or respond to evil, though.
They don't.
Even if that's what I'm saying. It's more of someone does that, it's like, I hate that person. If I could kill him, I would kill him. And it's all right. You know what I mean? So I think in a ideal world, what you're saying, I agree.
And that's why I'm just unpacking that nuance, because let's say somebody has somebody at gunpoint. Now I want to save that person at gunpoint if I can, out of love. I'll be emotionally primarily for the person that's could be a potential victim.
Yeah.
And yet, even though this wouldn't be my primary motive in that moment, the truth is, that person who is about to commit an act of evil and would deserve to go to prison for the rest of their life, legally, it would also destroy their life and their soul to commit that act of darkness. So I guess I just say that because I think there's a few layers that I think could be helpful even mentally to realize that confronting something out of love is loving to every party involved, as long as the motive is love.
Yeah.
And then you just have to say, okay, number one, what actually constitutes as evil?
Yeah.
And number two, is my approach loving? Something can be very confrontational, but the motive still be love, and it be done in love.
Yeah.
And Jesus, by the way, I heard Leonard Ravenhill say this. I may have put this when we did the Passion Journal. People especially that love to get righteously indignant and angry are like, Jesus whipped in the temple. And they ignore the fact that right before that, he looked over Jerusalem and wept. I heard Leonard Ravenhill say, Jesus never whipped before he wept. There was a brokenheartedness that would produce a righteous anger not born of the flesh and focused on self.
Yeah.
I think those are good thoughts. I think this is one of those conversations that is probably way easier to talk about in ideals around a table than it is to live out in the practicality of real life, because there is so much evil. My wife and I have had debates around this topic when it comes to the idea of protecting people that you love. You know, it's kind of like, hey, if somebody broke into my house and was trying to do this, you know, some of them are theoretical if you never experienced it, right? But it's like, what would your response be? And would you take them out? You know what I mean? And I think there's a lot that's very personal for every person to kind of wrestle through with that. That's why some people feel comfortable conceal carrying, and other people would never feel comfortable doing that. They would rather either take the risk but I remember we got into this talk one time, this debate, my wife and I, and it was really over this idea of, I want to say it's almost kind of, this sounds like a sovereignty kind of question, but it was almost like, but why do you need to feel the need to protect, you know, whether it's with violence, you know, and I'm not a violent person, but with violence if you have to. And it's hard to kind of explain all the time. Like, I think, again, I don't want to stereotype because it's not a male and female. And, well, Jackie's a 5th degree black belt, so I do not want to cross Jackie.
Let us know what martial art is. I'm curious.
I don't want to cross Jackie ever, and she would scare me. But, you know, I always, as not only a father and a husband, but I've always felt like when I'm out and I have my daughters and that, a sense of like your eyes open, responsible. If somebody does something, I'm the one who's going to respond. You know, like, you try to hurt them, you're going to have to go through me, and if you do, I'm going after you. You know, that whole mentality. And I'm not saying moms don't feel that way, because she obviously does. But I think guys are, to be stereotypical, but guys are not always, but maybe a little bit more physically minded in like, oh, I'm going to physically hurt, you know, versus at least me and my wife. So I'm like, I'll do that. And she was like, but why? Like, why don't we just trust God? Like, and what happens. And I'm like, see this, I said, so we had kind of,
this is like the Jim Elliott into the spear. Remember that thing?
Yeah.
They're like, why don't you have guns? Like, well, because we're ready for eternity. They're not.
Yeah. And so it was such an interesting, we were just talking about it one time and kind of back and forth, and it's
who won the debate?
Well, I think I did technically.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that because she's not here. I think I did. I think she understood, and I don't really understand that level of thinking, because I think there is a lot of evil in this world that God does not desire. And, you know, I think that's a long debated question. Like, how much should we use force to stop it? And it's almost like you want to think, if I saw somebody walking up to a school or someplace with a rifle or taking a shot right at that, like, if my kids are in there, I want somebody to take them out. This sounds so horrible. Or stop the threat. And it gets into debate about stopping a threat and what that looks like. And I think most people, the loving thing is like, if I can stop a threat without actually destroying or taking someone's life, 100%. That's what you would want every time.
Yeah.
But that's hard to do. That's hard to, you know what I mean? And so you do get into the whole point of in love, but I think it's a good point to say, I think a healthy person who's even safety-minded, protective type of person, I don't want somebody who's like loose, and it always scares me when we're running into safety people or security people, and they're just like, when I say they have like itchy trigger finger, they're just looking for a situation. Like, when I see that kind of mindset, I'm like, I don't know that you have the right mindset or the right heart in general, and you're looking for it, right? Versus somebody who cares so deeply.
Almost like you're eager. Like,
and it's kind of like, why would you be eager to be in a violent situation? No, you wouldn't, right? I think that, but I think there's another side where somebody doesn't want to, but if they feel like they have to protect people, a community, your family, your kids, There's something in you. I feel like that's that Peter in you. And again, Jesus calls him Satan, but he's
I'll
like,
never
not
forget-
on my dead body.
I didn't know what to do with it. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say was, I think that you bring up, and both of you, articulated well, some of the, I think, nuances around the conversation that are important. And I think it's good to think through some hypotheticals. Okay, someone breaking into your home, school shooter.
Yeah.
We can talk about
Church.
we can talk about death penalty later on down the road. That might be another conversation. But I think those are, I don't want to say extreme examples, but I'm not saying that we don't see shootings on the rise or things like that happening. They are okay, but let's talk about every day. Because I think that what is a more fascinating conversation to me is how you conduct yourself in love every day in the face of evil. Like, and let's define, and I don't know Jackie's context or what she's talking about or where she's come from necessarily in terms of evil, but I do pay attention to trends in social media, what people are concerned about, and I know that I've seen over the years of following Jesus and being in church world and being kind of in a bubble at times, like there are a lot of things that Christians categorize as evil and put into this category, and they feel like they have to like fight like against those things, and it often elicits like a certain response in a way. And I'm not saying that those things are wrong, or it's not wrong to speak up against some of those things. For example, like abortion. Like abortion is one of those things that like is an evil, and I think that's a cultural issue and topic. Those are things that I think. So I think one curious aspect of this, where my mind goes, is then how do you respond in love when you're in a conversation with someone who maybe holds a stance that you think is evil? Which, and we've talked about this a lot, but I do think that is a more of a like an everyday type
I do.
of,
I don't
of
think
response.
I agree. And I think that's a good one for us to explore. I don't think that's the context of what Jackie's saying, because she's talking about being a 5th degree black belt. So I think she's talking more about the violent kind. That'd be my guess. But I think that's a great question to ask, because there are a lot of things that we see even politically that people say that the other side is evil. Right. And so this is a debated thing. I do think that, like you gave an example of abortion, right? Yeah. I think there's a couple ways that we have seen people that are pro-life or anti-abortion respond. Mm-hmm. There are people who have gone and tried to blow up or have blown up abortion clinics, that have shot at abortion clinics. To me, I don't see anything loving about that. Yeah. That's not what I see, a loving response, right? Yeah. I think I remember in the 80s, there was always a level, and again, I'm not saying that this was, I think that there are peaceful, loving ways to respond to people that have a different opinion or a different, whether it's political, whether it's whatever, even if you think it's a moral evil. And I do think there's a way to respond to people that doesn't devalue them as a human, that is able to separate their ideological belief or their whatever from them as a person. I mean, we've talked about this before in this podcast. How do we disagree without it becoming personal? How do we not talk about somebody of a different political side, even if you think that a policy that they want to do is evil? And we see that on both sides all the time, without, I'm calling them names, they are Satan, they are this, and kind of the vitriol that sometimes comes out with it. So I think, to me, all of this goes back to what's actually in the heart. And I just think about Jesus and what he said. He said, out of the mouth flows what's in the heart. And he says, every evil.
Maybe that's where, if there's a tension like on what you're talking about, it's the tension between how do you fight evil while still winning people? Because when you think of abortion, I mean, my mind goes to, Paul says, it's not our job to judge those outside the church. And so a lot of times we make these soapbox issues outside the church against the, quote unquote, evil world. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't ever raise our voice and articulate what we believe God's heart is on an issue. I think that's actually really, really important. But I also think we miss, like, if I may think something's evil, but miss the nuance of the heart of a woman who is raised in poverty, maybe is a victim of sexual assault and thinks her life's endangered, and I may disagree, but she may not even view the baby as a baby. That doesn't make it any less wrong, I believe, for any life to be taken. But if I say I'm going to dehumanize that woman and not have compassion for her because I'm quote unquote standing against the evil,
Right.
I could be missing the mission of Jesus, which is the tension of how do I fight wrong but win people.
Yeah.
And what would love do?
Yes.
I mean, let's just take the scenario where a woman is caught in adultery, brought before Jesus, and basically put on public display. Hey, what do you think we should do? The law of Moses says to kill her. And that's when Jesus, writes in the sand and says, whoever's without sin, cast the first stone. And they all leave one by one. So even in situations where what she was caught in the act of doing was wrong, morally wrong, and according to their Jewish law, she could be stoned to death.
Yeah.
Even there, what was his response? See, I think about Jesus in that moment, and I think Jesus in that moment was modeling what would love do in this moment. And so I think love, and almost I want to put with love mercy, because I think mercy is an overflow of love, where mercy comes from. When someone doesn't get what they deserve, that is to me an overflow of love. And so I think that's a situation where maybe the law and justice would do this, but because of his love and his mercy, that's what came out in that moment. And it wasn't to condone, but it was to say, hey, now go and don't do this anymore. It's time to receive mercy and go. Love has more of a powerful effect at changing someone's heart who might be doing evil than responding in hatred.
Love conquers all.
That's what's crazy.
This is my personal opinion. You guys might disagree with me or not. That's fine. But I think that probably what I've experienced so far in my life is that humanity probably tends to come down more on the law justice side of things compared to love and mercy. And I think that for me, where I'm at in my journey, because I do think whether you're talking about the violent things, the bigger questions, or smaller things, I think my natural human response is for justice, for mercy, or for what's right to happen. And so I just think my mindset always is asking myself, okay, how can I, and this is why your sermon was so good on Sunday, how can I love? What can my response be in both the small situations and maybe in more intense situations? And I'm not going to tell people what to do. I think you have to work that out with Jesus. I mean, Paul says to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Like, you have to do the hard work and figure out where you're at in that journey. And but I was struck even thinking about this as I was sitting around the table and listening to you talk. But we often look at Jesus and we say, well, Jesus, it's easy for him to love and show mercy. I mean, he's God. He's also human. And I think he understands the fullness of the human experience and what the natural human tendency is in the fight for love versus mercy, or love versus justice, and he walks that balance perfectly. And one kind of guiding light that I've used as I've thought about these things throughout my life is this verse in 1 John, and I just want to read it. And it says that this is the message we've heard from him and declare to you that God is light, in him there's no darkness at all. If we claim to have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not live out the truth. But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And I just think, for me personally, this probably isn't for you guys, and Jackie, this may be good for you, it may not be, you have to work it out. But if I want to combat evil, my question is how do I be a person of light? Because wherever there's evil, there's darkness. And so whatever situation I find myself in, how can I be loving and bring light into that situation? And wherever that leads me, that leads me. But that's for me personally, as I try to wrestle with the tension of this issue, understanding that there's darkness everywhere, that the enemy wants to bring darkness into situations. But as a Christ follower, it's my job to bring light into these situations wherever they may go. And sometimes that means confrontation.
Yeah.
Sometimes that means, like, in order to take back from the darkness, you gotta go into the darkness, but your posture and how you go and all that matters. So
Yeah,
know,
maybe think of the movie. I saw this last year. I can't remember what it's called. Maybe you guys remember, but it was
Man on Fire.
Don't think that was a movie this last year, right?
No.
Yeah, I think that was pretty old. Was that Denzel Washington movie that was probably like
We
20
took
years
on
old that you
Mexico.
just?
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna say that one. There was a movie that I think it came out from that Angel group. I can't remember what the movie
I
one,
know
but it
what
was the
you're
one where they
Yes.
the guy who did the human trafficking,
Yes.
like going in
Yes.
there, and so it's there's definitely I think what's really hard is I don't look in the scriptures. I've read it so many times, right? I don't come out of the scriptures or come away from it going, okay, in order to do what's love, I have to be a pacifist. I don't see that. But I also have been deeply challenged to go, some of my natural response to evil may not be the most godly thing I could do.
Yeah. Yep.
Where that shakes out, we're all different experiences. Like you talk to anybody who's had to work in, to anybody that's either had to work in
Fire.
first responder, police type environments, high stress, and deal. And that's one thing. You talk to police officers. One of my best friends has been a police officer for 9 years, and you talk to a police officer, and when all they see is sometimes the worst of the worst, and
The
we're talking
effects
about
of
evil.
Yeah.
It does kind of like it's out there. And whereas a lot of the rest of the world, we can live in a
Naive.
little bit of naivety, where it's like, I don't say that's because there's somebody doing it. And if we didn't have anybody holding back the darkness to an extent, this place would get really bad.
Yeah.
But I also think about, the last thing I'll say is this, I know we're at time, but the last thing I think about is this whole idea of like everything happens for a reason and that. I don't necessarily hold that same view because I think there's a lot that happens in this world that God really doesn't desire and want.
That's right.
But because of freedom that he's given to us,
That's right.
and because of evil and all of what man does stuff. And so that's why I look at, there's a lot of injustice, but I also think scripture says that the wrath of God is being stored up. And that's not just, he's angry, he's mad at this. I really do think his wrath is born out of love. I think it's the same thing. I did that in the Revelation series. I think the reason why there's a wrath coming is because God loves his creation, and the amount of injustice and evil is happening. There's just coming a point. There's a tipping point.
Yeah.
There's some point where God is going to bring justice because he loves us so much. And so this is a really complex. I don't think we could just simply tie a bow on it and go, well, here, 3 steps. And if you just this situation, then do this, then this. I think it's more complicated than that.
It is.
I just think in my journey, I'll just say this, in my journey, as I've drawn closer to Jesus and he's changed my heart, I have found my initial response and what my mindset has been has started to change.
Yeah.
Just the longer I've been following, like my response before would have probably been more aggression, whereas it probably is less aggression than it was before. And some people go, that's just because you're getting soft. Well, it could be, but part of me is just, that doesn't mean that if someone's messing with my family or doing something that might see the side of me that I don't want to see either. And that's a really tough thing to kind of navigate and walk through. But I just, in general, I find my posture toward people, even people who are different, maybe like hold positions that people in our culture might say that's evil. The posture of my heart has been able to see that person a little bit more, try to separate that and go, I don't want to just do harm to stop them to do that. Now, if I see a threat, though, I hope, I don't know this, but I hope I would be one of those people that actually move toward the threat to stop it because of my love for people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's complicated, but
It is very complicated. Have you ever read, either of y'all ever read Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne?
I don't
It was a huge, it was almost like Love Wins level fame, but in the pacifism, Christian Shane Claiborne came out with, and he's a big pacifist that ended up living with the homeless in the streets of Philly. And
I remember his story.
So people debate, and it's funny because it was either him or somebody like him went on a podcast with Russell Moore talking about even World War II, which was, I was thinking about it again recently because I was there in Normandy. And I think the thought I have even too is maybe one of the other places where there's a tension, there's an overlap, is I believe in the kingdom of God, that the whole point of the church and what Jesus is doing in the world is bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. And it's our job. We're trying to bring,
Yeah.
it sounds cheesy, but the kingdom of heaven in Columbus as it is in heaven. But the thing I think we see that's encouraging and I think can help with context, and we see this a lot in the Old Testament, I think, too, that helps us understand is even while God's desire is to bring the culture of heaven to earth, God still deals with earth and the reality that it's in.
Yeah.
God deals in reality.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because it is easy to only stay in the theoretical
Yeah.
or the ideological.
Yeah.
God deals in reality. I should not want to punch someone that comes into the house and attacks my parents or whatever. God also deals in reality.
Yeah.
And that's where I think he's there with us in the messy and the muddy.
And he's probably a black belt.
And he's probably black belt. Yeah.
Probably.
So
Funny story. I won't say who, but a leader, pretty well-known leader, called me one time when I was in Lexington and said, when Peter cut off the ear of the person, he said, it's your season to be Peter. And cut off ears and trust Jesus to put him back on. And I have always thought, I don't know.
No, that's a good application of that.
That is,
man.
yeah.
Good conversation.
There we go.
Jackie,
Great
thank you for
conversation.
writing in. We love to receive just feedback and thoughts, whether it's from Sunday or the podcast. So if you have a perspective of this, I think we always entertain it.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for joining as always. You'll hear all the details in the outro, but we love to receive emails, questions, feedback. So send them in. And until next time, we will see you next week. Hey guys, it's Russ. Thanks so much for listening. We really believe if we can get around tables instead of behind screens, if we can talk to each other instead of at each other, we can make the world better. To help us do that, here are a few things you can do to help. First, if you haven't yet, leave a review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe on YouTube. This helps more than you know. Also, if you have been impacted by the community out of which this podcast comes, that's X Church. Maybe you're local or you've been touched by the messages and impact across the country, even the world. I want to encourage you to support this work. A powerful life principle is to invest in the people and places that invest in you. And so I want to invite you to do that right now by going to thex.church/give. You can give a one-time small gift, a sacrificial gift, or even become a recurring partner. Together, let's keep elevating the conversation, thinking higher, loving deeper, and making the world better. Cheers.